My name is Matthew, and I'm a hardcore biker. I own a GSXR motorcycle, a pretty fast bike in case you didn't know. I live in Grand Lagoon, Trinidad. Today was my second cousin's birthday, and my other cousins and I kept a little get-together for him. My encounter started when I left my home around midnight to get some snacks as the ones we had gotten before had been dissipated. The closest mini-mart was located out of town, about 2.5-hour drive under the speed limit. But being a biker, I loved speed. As I was about half a mile outside of town, driving on about 100 miles per hour, I accidentally hit the kill switch on the bike and it came off. I cautiously pulled over to the side of the road and hopped off. I then laughed at myself for making such a rookie mistake. It took me a few minutes after laughing at myself to realize something really odd. The entire area was completely quiet. Not just any kind of quiet. The type of quiet that makes a ringing sound in your ear. I stood there looking around, contributing to the surrounding quietness. But it was everywhere. Nothing was out tonight. Usually, you hear common bugs, like crickets and so on. But there was nothing. Memory soon kicked in, as I remembered overhearing my dad and his friend's conversation on hunting. His friend said, "Always remember when out there, if the woods get quiet, be cautious. It means there's a predator around." I quickly got quiet and paced myself and walked back to the bike feeling rather threatened. But there was nothing here. I hopped on my bike and turned the key, watching my dashboard light up. And that's when I heard it. I heard the sound of heavy footsteps on the road in front of me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as chills ran down my spine, signaling for me to get out of there. I stood there paralyzed with fear as my body denied the signals from my brain. And at that moment came a low growl. I stood there, overthinking what to do, as it growled once more. I quickly snapped out of it and pushed the start button on the bike and turned the headlights on. That was the biggest mistake of my life, because the sight that presented itself to me could never be unseen. 15 feet in front of me stood this thing. I'm saying thing because I've never seen anything like it before. Nothing on this earth resembles this, and I would consider myself an Animal Planet freak. It stood on its hind legs, about 7 feet tall with pale white skin and yellowish eyes. At first, I thought it could have been a bear, but there are no bears where I'm from. Its arms and legs were elongated and weird looking. It looked as if it were wearing an old tattered black fur coat. It was hunched over in the middle of the road looking right at me. It stared at me as if it saw a human for the first time. "What are you?" I asked, with a frightened voice. It stared at me for a few more minutes and then said, "What are you?" in the same exact context and sound. My heart dropped as this thing took a step towards me. At this point, I was too scared to think of anything. This thing literally just repeated what I said in my own voice. I quickly kicked the bike into first gear, turned the bike back toward the road, and started riding. As I revved the throttle, it let out a blood-curdling, ear-piercing scream as I rode off. I caught myself watching back ever so often, making sure I wasn't being pursued. I made it home safe that night. But now, I never go out after midnight. Especially not on that road. If any of you have any idea what this could have been, please let me know.
This story happened about 4 months ago, and I swear, I'm still completely freaked out. I don't expect you to believe my story, because I can't even believe what I saw for myself. Sometimes, I secretly still hope that what I saw was just a loose branch or some shadow, but I highly doubt it. I'm a 14-year-old male, and every year I go skiing with my family somewhere in the mountains. Usually, we stay for about a week with our camper on a campsite. The campsite is only a few minutes away from the gondola that we used to ride up to the top of the mountain. I know the area very well. We have been skiing there since 2013, so for about 5 years now, and I have never experienced anything like this. Every year, there is a big party and concerts, and a mountain at the top of the gondolas. The party falls on the week where we always visit. This is very important for the story. The party is always in the evening, and on this day, you can go skiing until midnight. Usually the slopes close at 7 in the evening. My brother, sister, and I always love this night because skiing in complete darkness is totally epic. So, like every year, we grabbed our skis and snowboards and head up to the gondola station at around 9 o'clock, 2 hours before the concert started, so that we still had time to go night skiing. I had a snowboard accident only a few days before, so I couldn't snowboard for long periods of time without my knees hurting like crazy. So, my parents, siblings, and I headed up to the station with the gondola. It's already dark outside, but still light enough to see something. I remember rubbing my knee and hoping that I could enjoy the night without too much pain. Up by the station, many people were already gathered, around 200 to 300 people, and some bands were already playing on the big stage. My siblings and I started to head down the slope. I was on my snowboard and my brother and sister on their skis. My parents were listening to the bands while drinking some beer. They didn't plan to go skiing that night. We were skiing for about 1.5 hours, and more people gathered by the stage. My siblings and I took the lift up one last time to be there for the beginning of the concert. About half an hour after the beginning of the concert, I noticed that my knee was hurting a lot. I was tired and stuff, and I was also freezing. My parents offered to take me to the gondola and to go to the campsite to get a good night rest. I agreed. My parents and siblings stayed up on the mountain because the concert was still a few hours long and it had just started. So I grabbed my board and stepped onto the gondola that would take me back to the valley. The trip down to the valley with the gondola took about 20 minutes. There were not many people in the gondolas around me because most people were still up there enjoying the concerts. I got up my phone and started playing some random stupid game. After about 15 minutes in the gondola, I heard a low thud from the gondola behind me. I looked up from my phone and was completely confused because I was sure that nobody had gotten on the gondola behind me. I turned around and squinted into the darkness. I could see the gondolas behind me, but not very clearly. I had no idea where the thud had come from, or what it was, until I looked at the bottom of the gondola. There was a creature hanging on the bottom of it. I could only see the outlines of it, so I wasn't sure if it was an animal or a person or something else. I stood on the top of the bench in the small gondola and opened the small window on the side of the doors to get a better look. I turned on my phone flashlight. What I saw then almost made me drop my phone out of the gondola. At first glance, I thought it was a coyote, but at second glance, I noticed that it definitely was no coyote. The creature was about as big as a Dane and was covered in black-gray fur with patches of fur missing. Its face was completely weird. The snout was way too long for a normal coyote and the teeth were sticking out, both upper and lower jaws. The eyes were yellow-reddish. The creature was holding onto the gondola with its long, skinny arms. It had long, looking claws. I stumbled back and pressed myself against a glass window. I looked down hoping that I would be in the valley soon, but I had about 5 minutes left. I could already see the station. I kept my eyes glued to the creature behind me on the other gondola. It stared right back at me and grinned. Not a kind of dog grin that you know if it's panting or sometimes looks like they're smiling. But no, it was a full-on grin, wide-mouthed and showing its teeth. Then, it started to rock back and forth, still holding on to the gondola. The entire thing started to rock, and so did mine, and the one in front of mine and behind me. All because this thing was swinging. They were all attached to one long steel rope. I started to get scared. I tried to calm my breathing down to get rid of my anxiety attack. The creature flung itself forward to my gondola. It tried to grab the bottom of my gondola. I was completely shocked when it jumped because the gondolas are about 20 feet apart from each other. I heard a large clang as the creature held on to the bottom of my gondola. The valley was only a few minutes away, and I completely freaked out and started crying. I heard a loud, pitched scream from under my gondola, and I hovered in a ball on the bench. About a minute away from the valley, I heard the creature let go and drop to the ground, which was about 50 feet away, with a loud thump. I peered down and saw it sprinting away into the woods below. After I got off the gondola, I could barely walk or speak. After I made it to the camper, I locked all the doors and windows, curled up in a ball, and cried. I didn't go skiing the next day, and didn't tell anyone what I saw because I knew they wouldn't believe me. I live on the west coast of British Columbia, in Canada, about midway up the coast. I was driving my girlfriend back to her grandaunt's house, 2 towns over from mine, about a 2.5-hour drive on the highways. I had driven her home and spent the day visiting her family. This town she is from is right on the coast. It's a port city. Not super important, but the point is that I spent the day there and was now getting ready to drive back home. About 25 to 30 minutes into the drive, I'm on the highway that runs parallel to the mouth of the river in one side and the CN tracks on the other. So it goes rail on my left and then the road I'm on and then some sort of mini channel where the river ends. I'm driving, it's getting dark, but I'm not tired or drowsy at all. There are a few rest areas along the road on my right, on the riverbank. I need to piss, so I start slowing down at the first one and something scurries across the road. And that's almost all that happened. It was 4-legged, at least from what I saw, black, like black as a night, like unnaturally dark. No texture or anything to it, almost like a void of light or color in the shape of this thing. It ran out of the bush, over the rails. I was going slow enough that wind and highway noise was gone, and I heard it. Out of the brush came this sound, like metal tabbing. It seemed like it was running over the rail. Then the sound if he took a rod or rebar and stabbed it into the ground. Then metal again, as it ran in front of me, across the road. Its body shape was like how people describe a UFO, almost a flat disc shape, like an oval stretched out, with its legs protruding from the front and back. It had no features, no eyes, no face or mouth, that I could see anyway. It ran across the road, limbs stretching out as it ran. Then, it ran into the rest area, over the bank, and I'm guessing into the river. I kept driving. I didn't piss until I got home 2 hours later.
When I was about 12, my dad decided to go to Holland with my grandmother and other family members. My mother and 2 siblings and I stayed home. I'm the middle child, but am the oldest boy. With my dad being gone, I had to do the chores. It was winter, and I live on a farm, so I had to tend to the animals. Since it gets cold in the night, the animal water freezes. We raised 2 beef each year for meat. I got up at 4, as I had to do the whole time my father was gone, 'cause I had school. I got dressed and headed outside. This was my 5th day or so of doing this. It was still dark out. There was a clear sky allowing me to see the moon and stars through the trees. I could see me breathe as I walked to the barn. I noticed that it was unusually quiet. Normally, the cows moo at me when they hear or see me. I walked into the barn and fed them their grain and alfalfa hay, and went over and broke the ice in their water trough. I fed the 3 cats we had at the time. Only one is around today. I then went around the back of our barn to look at the moon. The sky was just starting to show signs of approaching morning. All of a sudden, the cows flew out of the barn and ran straight through the damn fence. They continued running into the pasture along the creek. I then saw this 6 to 7 foot tall creature run the same direction but along the creek in the opposite direction. It made its way into the woods in a matter of seconds. Once it was in the woods, I could kind of smell a nasty smell, but maybe it was just the cows or something. I mean, I was right behind the barn. One thing that is crazy about it is that it was almost completely silent. The only time it made noise is when it stepped into the puddles along the creek. I began walking back to the house when I realized there was something in the barn. I slowly snuck over. I looked through the crack in the door, and I couldn't believe my eyes. This thing was eating the corn out of the cow's grain. One by one, every grain of it. He then looked towards the door and stood up. He looked around. He then grabbed a brick my dad uses to hold the tarp down over our grain, because our barn leaks, and threw it towards the door where I was at. I jumped and started to shake. I was in such disbelief that I actually hit myself in the head, hoping I was hallucinating. I could feel the adrenaline in me rushing like crazy. I decided to peek again. I looked through the crack, but everything was dark. I soon realized that I was looking at this ugly bitch in the face. I scooped gravel off the ground and flung it in the crack and ran. I turned and looked at the barn. This thing jumped out the window on the side and ran towards me. It jumped the fence and was gaining fast. I ran to the house and the damn door was locked. I ran to the garage and it was open. I managed to get in and I waited there for about 5 minutes. I slowly opened the door to peek. Our garage was separate from our house, so I had to do a big 10-stride run to the back door. I sprinted and made it inside, thanking God that the door was unlocked. I looked at the window and turned the garage light on. I about died when I realized it was only 10 feet away. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't think they would believe me. I've only told my sister, and the only reason I told her was because within the last year, she started going in the woods. She has found footprints. She has also had glimpses of them. I never let her go alone anymore. Whatever I saw, I'm sure is a Bigfoot. If the natives have any cave carvings and paintings of them, including many legends, then why can't they exist? I don't believe, I know. We find in the same paintings a saber-toothed tiger and the woolly mammoth. I'm Aboriginal, and we have our own name for what Americans call skinwalkers. I am from the Central Australian desert. Kwadacha are skinwalkers in the Native American folklore, and they are eerily similar to Aboriginal folklore. My great-nan used to tell me stories. One was when she gone picking berries and looking for witchetty grubs, honey ants, and bush bananas with her sister back when she was younger. One had followed them to where they were camping. During the evening, as the sun was going down, they heard something crying. It sounded near. When hearing sounds, it has the opposite effect. If it was near, it would sound far away, but if it were far away, it was definitely right there. They, my great-nan and her sister, stayed where they were and acted as if they were asleep, alert but paying no attention to it. The dogs they took with them were barking but didn't move. It was on the outskirts of their camp, just out of the light of the fire, crying. It was there, by the faraway cries it was near, and was trying to lure them away from the light. She had told her sister to not look at it or try to speak to it. It sounded like a child crying. She said it didn't move away until the sun had started coming up. Guess it got bored. As soon as the sun was up, they made a home as fast as they could. This story always stuck with me. In my culture, whistling at night can draw them. Talking about them by word of mouth also draws them. Thankfully, I've never seen one, but I do believe they're out there. I've always known the cryptid as an evil spirit. It could very well differ between tribes, even tribes so close together. It could even be derived from the Gadachi man. But, looking back on the stories told to me, the latter is also described as the Featherfoot man.
A few months back, I was on a routine third shift. I work as a police officer in a very small town in Ohio. It is currently the middle of fall. I'm not going to say where, people can find it pretty easily. Anyway, I was on night patrol, driving in my patrol car. Most nights, we are required to get out of our cruisers to check areas our cruisers can't fit. There is a super long, almost 2-mile bike path we are supposed to walk down. Well, one night as usual, I got out and walked the path. Usually, we do this to make sure no one is hurt or overdosed. My flashlight was dimmed during the walk, since I forgot to put it on the charger earlier that day. About 1 mile into the walk, I started to feel very strange. Not a typical gut feeling. A feeling that you know something is wrong, or something is about to go wrong. I began to hear leaves crunching. Turning in every direction, the leaves would break. My light is so dim it is hard to see much of anything. I continue trying to get this walk over. I start to speed up. In doing so, I must have triggered something's instinct. Every time I sped up, the breaking of leaves would get louder and continue with my pace. I get to the point where I know something is there, so I just stop and listen. I waited for 5 minutes, hoping to catch some kids playing a prank or a fellow officer trying to get a laugh. But nothing. The sounds have stopped. I began shining my light all around me, slowly turning my light from tree to tree. Then I noticed something odd. I passed by it the first time. I shine my light back in the direction I noticed from earlier. I can see something, but at the time, it was hard to make out. The only difference I noticed was the contrasting colors. Old gray and black with red and orange leaves and a brown tree. I shine my light up from it. Then, 2 huge glowing eyes. Nothing like I have ever seen before. I have seen deer, wolves, and other animal eyes that reflect light, but nothing like this. I hesitated, almost drawing my firearm. But I stopped myself, knowing that I could get myself in trouble if it was a prankster. This thing took 1 step out from behind the tree. I got a whole body view. It was covered in feathers, extremely tall and didn't appear to be completely human. I noticed it had hands like a human, but it having feathers that looked almost forced into the skin. I start to back up. Thankfully, it never moved more than when it did earlier. I was frozen in fear, too scared to move. But I snapped out of it when dispatch radioed. "Police 1, check up." The sounds of the radio snapped me out of my trance. I started walking backwards very quickly, not taking my eyes off this thing one time. It felt like forever, but I finally got back out of those woods. My cruiser was in the clearing. I bolted as fast as I could to it, not looking back until I got back in. I looked into the wood line from where I came in. Then I could see this thing's whole body, head shaped like a demonic owl. head laying tilt, just staring with its huge eyes. Its body, covered in some parts by feather, other by skin that appeared to be falling off, like it was rotting. That terrible odor came through, so powerful it is engraved into my memory. I unlocked my cruiser, crawled in and locked my doors. I attempted to shine my spotlight and brights at it, but it ran back into the woods, letting out a scream that was like no other. I could feel the creatures below rattle my insides, leaving me almost sick to my stomach. After it ran, I drove back up to my station, sitting inside to recap what had just happened. I asked my fellow officers about it sometime later, but got very odd responses. I was being told to never look where the noises came from. It would be better if I just ignored them altogether. I was confused at this point, wondering if they had seen it themselves, but I was never given a definitive answer, just told to keep my light charged and my eyes forward. I live in eastern Pennsylvania. My friends and I were hunting coyote at night at about 2 a.m. We were going up an unfamiliar logging trail. We had reached a clearing and eventually ran across a log that lay across the road. We stood around for a moment talking when we started hearing a sound. He said it sounded like sticks breaking. I think it sounded like someone hitting a dull axe against a log. The sound was, by my estimate, 150 yards away. I, being the more experienced one, said it was just the wind, but it was extremely irregular, like one knock every 30 to 45 seconds. It wasn't coinciding with the gust of winds, and it had changed location a bit, but remained in the same area. We also heard the noise a few times off to the side in the trees, and it sounded like it was approaching us, as if two separate things were making the noises. We felt uneasy and began to leave. That is when the sounds all stopped. After that, we left in my car. He pointed out that the woods became deathly silent while the noise was being made, and I pointed out that it stopped once we left. I remember people saying Bigfoot would break sticks to communicate or warn people. I looked up the noise and it's called tree knocking. It perfectly fit the description of what happened to me. Being a skeptic, I would like to know if anything else may have been making that noise. And did anyone else have any similar experiences? And do you think that I ran across a cryptid?
My name is Carlos. I am now currently 14 years old. This sighting happens while I was backpacking in rural Arkansas, high in the mountains. Me and my friends, which for confidential reasons, I won't say their names, but let's call them Jerome, John, Caleb, and my crush who I will call Laura, went backpacking with my fellow church youth. On the very first day backpacking, I noticed how quiet it was. I mean, like the forest was empty, kinda. It was just silent. But I ignored it and put it off as maybe it was just very quiet here. But being a country boy, I should have known better. After long and tiring 5 hours of walking, we finally decided to stop and rest for the night. I will explain how the surrounding area looks like, because it is important. We were separated into two groups, guys and girls. Us guys, we slept in a clearing near a massive hill, while the girls slept under a ridge of a cliff, and on the right of both camps was a river. Also in between the camps was a ravine. Us guys, being young and stupid, decided to explore before it was too dark. We ended up finding this cave around 30 feet away from our camp. After exploring the cave, which was empty, we decided to go eat dinner. For some reason, we didn't make a fire. After eating, our counselor told us that we needed to have a buddy system when we used the bathrooms because it was hunting season. After the meeting, we went to bed. That night, I woke up with a strong urge to pee. Being the good friend I am, I didn't wake up any of my sleeping friends as I climbed up that massive hill to pee behind a tree or near the top. Now, I know that was dumb, but hey, you'd rather go pee in a ravine. Now, what sounds better? As I was going up, I heard a branch break, but I brushed it off as some kind of nocturnal animal during mid-pee. I heard a low growl. It was like a guttural growl. I was in mid-pee. I couldn't stop. As soon as I finished peeing, I raced down the hill and made the mistake of turning around. I saw a massive, easily 6 foot tall, very pale humanoid-looking creature with huge black eyes which were fixated on me. I immediately ran to my tent and passed out from fright. The next morning as we were leaving, I saw in that cave a pale-looking face peering out at me. My friends didn't believe me, but one of my friends came up to me and told me that he saw it because he takes medication for his depression and he thought he was hallucinating. I lived alone, and in this remote location that we don't have cable or anything, so the only option is satellite TV. It was a humid summer night in July, and the TV was acting up, so I needed to go out and readjust the satellite like usual. I took a flashlight out and a gun with me. When I went outside, it was unusually quiet, like so silent it was unnerving. I brushed the thought off and went to the dish, which was in the corner of my yard. I went to work, making sure all the wires were all right and pointing it into a different angle. Suddenly, I heard a small snap of a stick to my left and turned my flashlight to the direction, and I saw a creature standing there. I got a good look at it for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably only about 10 seconds. I slowed and backed off and ran back to my house and locked all the doors and windows. The creature was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. When I shined the light at it, the first thing I saw was the head. It has cropped ears that pointed upwards. Its snout was narrower than a bear's and longer than I could imagine on a canine. I could make out large teeth protruding from the jaw. Its eyes were a deep red shade that seemed to reflect off the light as I was pointing at it. The body was muscular and huge. It had long arms and appeared to be longer than its legs, broad shoulders that tapered into a skinnier waist. It was slightly crouched over when I saw it, with one hand wrapped around a small tree. I could make out the legs, which were similar to a dog's. It had an obvious hocks, and even with the crouched position, I could tell that his height was probably 6 feet or more. Standing up to full height, this creature could easily be 7.5 feet tall. The fur was black and thicker around the neck and chest, and the bottom half significantly less so, almost like it was balding. I don't know if it was aggressive or not. What I do know is that feeling of dread unlike I've ever experienced before. Was it just observing me or stalking me? For a creature this large, it was deceivingly silent. It got within 15 yards of me without ever noticing.